Hello, I'm Tenaya, and this is called. This poem is it's poems, and this poem is called "Some Blazonry for JJ." I've had James Joyce on the brain, and it's a poem for him. Hard oak with karate branches, serene leaves in a field, mirror of furrows, the bark, jewel to where flowers end, egg in an ocean of grass, sing that Humpty Dumpty was an oak tree, and that the grasshopper had the whole white breast in its feelers, milking down the rubbing thighs, flow that the clouds down the belly of sleep are their own rapid engagement to your dreams. In the cheap cheeps, a whole mirror of forests running up the lines of the bark of the tree, ascending into a fountain of green ejaculation, or 1,000 pointed clitorises surging from the deep. This next poem is completely pointless. Lewdly sight-caught sloping soft, a field, a boat, walking beneath the city's gown, sneaking up peaks of the clouds, and inanimate windows reveal torsos at night, headless hands below us, heads and shoulders above. Unambiguous streetwalkers, stilted in their duck coats, except the man in a white tee, rolling on ecstasy, diving between ladies in skin-tight skirts and heels on a vague autumn night, walking like lamps. In the morning she rises to find us set in motion, to her ankles we, in rosy light, hold inside her gray gown. New poem. Love does not come from a demand or promise, but comes to no need. I would hold you forever in a slackened grip if I didn't think the bells were meant for me and you. Besides me, always beside us are others turned. But I would hold you, or I am nothing. Refute the world, for I've conceived paradise. New cuts keep occurring on my hands, felt as snow. In the smooth glass there must be, yes, cracks glow, held up to the light. White floor of the ocean. There are fish that resemble separately Chinese and American men. As for woman, the seaweed do resemble poetry. The snow is a muted orchestra, bowing and blowing in the motion of thuds. The basement becomes a sustained breath, and the addition of more white to this chalkboard is a high-swung pounding, a more minute and curt reverberation than each winter. A city of Mickey Rooney and breakfast at Tiffany's flutters white and is constantly golden tan, like a whole river in repeating patterns of the bottom of a waterfall. The dentist and the optometrist look in the mirror and pout as their patients detail feeling, galvanized repeatedly in single accord, over and over again thrash the air. Everyone is hurling things from an upper landing and they fall nowhere. This town is famously characterized as having no love but soft spots in it that batted lashes play on and triumph up for, exploiting evil cancer, the hidden cock and smoke robes, base Chinaman desire recesses. Everything is cheaper in the city of Mickey Rooney's from the movie Breakfast at Tiffany's, and all the girls can do their shopping there. That is an awesome pentagon. Plastic tubing winds the styrofoam around the vertices of ocean and sky, staggered motion of sailing over, the refusal of waves and into bursting eucalyptus rays. Tidal hills of the hellebore garden, static twilight of passing ambitions. You will never return past the gates of the hellebore garden. You will quivering die in the myrtle under aged trees, light beneath the leaves as linens play about you. The gender of the earth washes over the sky, whose lone member departs to penetrate the earth mossed over in dark blankets. I have one more poem. Two more. How much do I have time for two? I've been trying to get on my flower game because I'm doing the poetry thing, and I found this book of flowers, and this flower is called pheasant's eye, and I looked that up, and it had another name called false hellebore. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing hellebore right, but then I looked up hellebore, and they have like whole gardens of hellebore, and it just looks like some King Arthur mystical place. And I was like, this is it. This is that thing. Like, I've been... So like hellebore garden has just been like in my head for 3 days. And so it comes up repeatedly. And so that in the next poem, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, is my point. Every morning my hands are playing some joke. The light brings everything else in with it. To end nearly and in toppled size, the process of itching down. High we rose. Tenaya, do roses strangle the dawn? Through vacuous columns stretch myself to its peg, you and sunless reef of clenched-eyed anemones, swish of water and the weight of more water, endless, passes and returns, scarlet breath and nacreous eyes. You did not seem sad to see me go, almost as if you were exhausted or a composite of faces in a crowd. In the belly button of neon, purple dreams that follow make subway stops of the raindrips between trains. My concern with the other wheels on a ramp, seeing or dispensing of crashes unfold the same contraption again. Front spoke caught on a rose bush, tugging a bike out of a rose bush, while the horizon show is starting and soon passes overhead. Fish, unmoved in shallow water, pregnant as all hell with morning plashes. Familiarity of sound, hellebore garden, where sight assumes false hellebore, yellow-specked concentric black tightens into the belly button, or tapeworm mouth, eye of shot-spattered pheasant. Gleaming scavenger dog eyes reflect little white flecks, ice jewel at the bottom of a moonlit ravine, deer caught all night in the ha-ha. As this, unaccommodatingly conscious on white sheets, filling like a sewage chamber with birdsong over locomotives. Nausea in the color of ambrosia. Love to uppercut this cost of the speeding sea. There is some comfort of the clouds won't tell that the stars are shadows from. You gave me the head-splitting mystic you. I questioned his political awareness of the drought. He told me, I told him, water is an anti-permutation. Water has a gray-mottled black, lifted sick, long-necked beasts to the hole we fall from, back, to the interconnected crawling from and swatted into clap of rock again, overcome by the waves we are the upward, downward undulations of, and the muscled leaves. Mother smoothie, backward swirl, high, pitched in twine, strings of the prostrate puppet, relax. Summer words begin to count, sumptuous ground, Mobius city, its bucking stopped in a summer tangle.
Hello. So I wrote a series of short stories, and one of these short stories, just for context, was from the perspective of Ben Affleck. So I will be reading an excerpt called Mini Driver from the short story Ben Affleck in Mexico. Just let me do that. Okay. Mini Driver. Minnie was our first choice. We were so unprofessional. I think we were, an hour and a half late to her audition? Gus Van Sant was waiting with her, and afterwards he scolded us. He was like, never do that to me or one of your actors again. He and Robin were like our parents on set. Minnie was too, eventually, when she got comfortable. When we got to the audition, she was so riled up. She'd been sitting there for an hour, and she just gave us so much energy and was like walking through some scenes with us, like not even doing her lines, just like asking questions and answering them for us. We loved her. She was so smart. And Matt immediately had a crush on her, I think. I think we all did, actually. We tried to joke with her about it, and she was game. She basically tolerated us. We were both so young at the time, Matt and I. I was 24 when we started shooting, and Matt was 26, and I think that dynamic always worked in our favor on set. We were always checking each other on stuff. Neither of us got away with anything, and adding Casey and Minnie and Cole to that dynamic was pretty powerful in terms of having this very young, very smart group of people all surrounding us. So we cast Minnie eventually, but we had to rewrite because she's got this very strong personality, and she can't do an American accent for shit. We had a house that we were renting in Southie for the shoot where Casey, Matt, Cole, and I were staying. I think it was a romantic idea that Matt and I would get this house and pace the empty living room working on our characters and writing more stuff, but mostly we just drank. Minnie invited herself over after the second day of shooting. She knew she was in a boys' club, and I think she knew she would have to make her presence known in order to participate on set. We were very collaborative, and we told her that on the first day. We wanted to offset how out of control it was all starting to feel. And when I say that, by no means do I think that anyone who was working with us was working against us or trying to take over creative control, but we didn't know how to deal with the studios really or how a day gets organized. We had a bunch of different people helping us. So really the realm where Matt and I felt like we had some kind of ability to dictate was with the writing and the acting and the way the movie was going to come across and the spirit behind it, and Minnie went right into that. Her first scene, the first one we shot, is the one with her where she meets Chucky and Morgan and Cole and tells this lewd joke. That joke wasn't even in the script. Minnie already had it in her repertoire, and the first take she whips it out, and Matt and I were like, where the fuck did she come from? It was April. It was really rainy and cold that month. Minnie had rented a car and was still terrible at driving in the States. She used to hit things all the time, like backing up into mailboxes and to the crew's truck on location. She even got a ticket because she parked with her wheels half up on the curb. When she came to the house, she brought all this whiskey. She could barely make her way around Boston, but she did manage to find the liquor store. We did a shot from each one. She got us wasted and made us listen to David Bowie. Minnie. My father's Irish. Me father's Irish. I have something in common with you Boston boys. Minnie sways against the fireplace, an unused fireplace in a house rented by 3 20-somethings. There is something studied about the disarray, the emptiness of the room. They are smart, and Ben, she's looking at you, a little eager. Minnie wears a red t-shirt and holds a glass of whiskey. They have abandoned the shots and are drinking from liquor glasses. A little later. Minnie, you know what Peter O'Toole said about marriage? Minnie sits upright in her armchair. In a deep timbre, a posh accent. Find a woman you loathe and give her your house. All 3 men laugh. Matt says something along the lines of an offer. Does she want this one? I was taken with her right away. I mean, how could I not be? She was this firecracker. At that time in my life, and I think in that particular situation, she was just so perfect for the role and for the film. She was smart, she was really passionate, very sincere, sometimes took things a little too seriously maybe, took things to heart. And that can be good and bad to work with. Yeah, great girl. Matt was smitten. He had dated a lot of girls, but they were all kind of like Skylar, that part, very quick-witted, outspoken, brunette. But you idealize people when you write about them, I think. There's an artistic tendency to fantasize and sort of place yourself into this role or place your own outlook onto this person. All the girls Matt dated were quasi-Skylar prototypes, and then here's Minnie Driver, and it's like, oh, she's real. Skylar's real. She's a real person. Minnie begins to sing Elton John's Candle in the Wind. It is 3 months before Princess Diana of Wales will be killed in a car crash, before the song will become her pop elegy. Her death will affect Minnie greatly, but abstractly. She wavers between sadness for the woman and sadness for the country. Neither feeling manages to settle, as she knows neither very well. I'm the last of the British diaspora, she will say in an interview, conducted after she lands the Oscar nod for Goodwill. It will go unprinted. Elle does not print politicisms, least of all obtuse ones. But Minnie will nevertheless think about it a lot. The phrase will ring around in her head at the health food store, in traffic on the 10 from Santa Monica, when she's having sex. The last of the British diaspora. Just like when she makes jokes about Maggie Thatcher to her American friends, the words seem hollow and bizarre. She knows better what the words can conjure than what they actually mean. Matt invites her to sit next to him on the couch. They play a game where one person names a film, and the next names an actor in that film, and then the next in line names another film with that actor. Whoever makes a mistake or is too slow in the uptake takes a drink. The boys play with loud, enthusiastic interruptions. Then it is 12:30, and Minnie elects to take a cab back to her hotel. Matt walks her to the payphone on the corner. When the cab pulls up, Matt hands her $20 and tells her it's from Petty Cash. There's this moment, I'm not sure you would have caught it, but when we got up at the Golden Globes, I'll never forget that. You'd think that once you get up there, your brain would just evacuate everything that isn't readily available or right in front of you, and it is like that, at least at first. When they called our names, to be honest, we weren't prepared for the possibility that we would win. It was talked about. We went through some pretty rigorous training just for award season, how to conduct ourselves at the shows, whether or not we lost. The guy we worked with was really insistent that if we were to win, and that didn't seem unlikely in the weeks leading up when the buzz starts to get around to you, that we really had to play up how new we were to this. Play the newcomer, play the rookie, he said. His name was Roger Holderson. He was this old PR guy. Never act like you expected it, but don't be stupid. Don't act like you didn't deserve it. That was the gist. The shock of it that you can see in our faces is totally genuine. We weren't prepared for it, even though we thought we were. I remember walking through that fucking room, all those tables. I said to Matt, I don't know how the TV people do it, because the walk up there is long, and everyone is pretty drunk by then, especially us. But everyone from TV is way in the back, and sometimes the music just runs out before they even get to the mic. Anyway, I guess it became very well known after the fact that Matt and Minnie were together during the shoot, and afterwards for a time. By that point, I think they'd been broken up for a while, and it wasn't very amicable. He announced it on Oprah. But to be perfectly honest, there were people who had conversations outside of the media. It was over beforehand. But I think Minnie was angry that he said anything at all. She was a little more media literate at that point in her career than he was, than either of us. We had no idea, Anyway, we get up there, and I'm thanking everyone. I forget Minnie. I was just rushing through this list we wrote on a napkin like half an hour before, just trying to get through the producers and the writers and the directors and execs that we had to mention. And Matt mutters, "and Minnie," at me under his breath. And yet I did thank Boston twice at the Oscars, so there you go. Thank you.
I wrote this thing, it's called How to Map a Desert, and it's a little hard to choose where to read from because it's a few different stories. I'm a human rights and written arts major, and this began with the story of these women in Chile. They're called Las Mujeres de Calama, and they, after the dictatorship in the 1970s, go into the desert, the Atacama, which is the northern part of Chile, looking for their loved lost ones because they think that their bones are there. So part of this story is that. Part of it is told in one of the woman's perspectives. And the other part is fragmented, and it's a truck driver. He's driving around the same area, the Atacama, and he takes materials from this abandoned prison camp to build new houses with them. There's a new housing complex for the miners. There's a lot of mining in the area. And I think I'm reading sort of from the end and from Pedro, the truck driver. What you need to know is that at this prison campsite, he encounters a man named Luis, and they have strange talks. Also that Pedro has been driving around and he bumped into this thing. It's a bone. It's a really big bone. I don't know how to do this. 3 hours of pulling and hunching in the sinking... Oh, sorry. I should tell you that also Pedro keeps a journal, so some parts are different from others. 3 hours of pulling and hunching in the sinking sand and tying new knots when they weaken. Pedro is sweating fast with his underarms slipping against his damp shirt, with his forearms hot and reflecting the sun. He has managed to tie 3 knots around the bone, one at the middle and the others at the ends, but they slip and move closer or farther apart as he pulls the 3 ropes together. He's turned the truck around and opened up the back doors so that they are closest to the bone. 2 more hours with pulling and stopping and sitting to take a warm sip of Coke, but Pedro is finally able to tug the bone up onto the platform of his truck. The sound when it hits the metal floor is deep and reverberates for a moment throughout the walls before the silence settles back in. The compass can point south, weighed down by sleep, but this time the compass has been made to point south. What is the weight that makes one reenact a day? What is the weight that makes one come back? 24 minutes, 33 seconds from Chacabuco in the general south direction, large bone found, size of about a man and a half. In the immediate surroundings, after some digging through the sand, other bones found. They lie in a long shape, wide at the center, thinning out towards the end, the whole surface the length of approximately 10 men. It is unclear what this was. Bone taken from site for further information. How to drive back to this place is unclear. Pictures taken. There are also pictures. In schools across Chile, geometry classes are being held in which students learn to draw perfect circles with compasses. First history class, but then after midday comes geometry. Holding the tip of the compass in place and not letting it hop while turning the knob is not easy for the students. But when the module will be over in 4 weeks' time, they will all know exactly the right amount of pressure to give the turning, to create perfect circles of all sizes. They will even make their own designs with small circles inscribed in larger ones or crisscrossed, creating new angles and shapes. The radius of the circle from Chacabuco to the site of the bones is 24 minutes and 33 seconds long. It can be drawn in the sand with a rope that is held at the prison camp and pulled until it is taut. If the site is in the general south direction, once the circle is drawn, it can be divided into 4 equal sections to narrow the area of interest. This circle is large and covers a good part of the desert, maybe intersecting other drawn circles before it or ones that are still to be drawn. Figure 17 is a map made by hand, outlining Chacabuco and the nearest highway. It is not drawn to scale, but one understands from looking at the image that the nearest town is not near. The highway continues out of the page on the top right and bottom left, with Chacabuco drawn in the center. The slow and precise lines show that this diagram was made with care and with time. You don't need anything at all. You don't need anything at all. Pedro repeats to himself for weeks in his truck as he drives around with the bone in the back. He slides it left or right when he has other materials to transport and offers a smile when construction workers catch a glimpse of it while helping him unload. If he understands Luis's line or not, at least he repeats it to himself. He's been able to come to Chacabuco and drive up and down the country on the long highways only because of the phrases by which he remembers his father. He saved them because the tone in his father's voice changed when he said these lines to him at the dinner table years ago. Just as he recognized that tone, he knows to echo Luis's lines now. Although Luis is not as old as Pedro's father, time keeps going, and he will be that old at some point. The younger generation will one day have to pick up the phone and inform those younger still that there has been a death in the family. The fact that we age is marked by the picking up of the phone and dialing, holding in place information that someone has not yet received. The call is not a decision, it must be made, and the how to tell the story is not something you're allotted time to figure out. We age by telling the story of the deceased to those still alive, in that moment before mourning, when what matters most is the passing on of information. Then you hang up. This transition of the young picking up the phone is not something recognizable at first, but when their phrases begin to stick, that is when the dial tone is ringing and you're hearing sounds come out of the phone, sounds you do not understand the meaning of yet. Object found at 22 minutes 33 seconds, identified as whale bone. Old man at the gas station mentions that the desert used to be a body of water, and that is why the sand still attempts to sway like the waves, remembering or reenacting. He says 2 years ago marine biologists were brought out to look at the site of the bones, but without enough funding, the investigation was brought to a close. He didn't believe them that they had found whales in the desert, but when I show him the bone, he is made to believe. If the rain doesn't come, we won't know where there are things beneath the sand. Calama, Chuquicamata, and Chacabuco are some of the lined points of the last frontier. Not because this place remains uninhabited, but because after walking on it, across it, and having seen it from the air, there is no understanding of it. A city like Santiago is filled with smog, hurried and growing. A smaller city like Valdivia is the space of discreet welcomes, warm dinner rolls, and a seafood market. The Atacama Desert is the driest on earth. With coca candies for the altitude or the largest bottle of water, those that walk here still bend to the heat, knees pointed. If what is below tells the story of what is above, the irrigations dictating where people can walk, there are few magnets connecting one life up top to another on the bottom. The architecture of driving in the desert is one that is done against all. If the desert is no place for a human to live, don't tell that to the desert people, for they'll know you come with ideas about water, compasses, and gasoline. Figure 17 is a piece of wood that has been carved into with nails and a hammer. Parts of the wood have been removed, creating hollow lines differentiated from flat areas. There is a below and an above. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to be reading the first chapter of my short novel, Pixelated: A Second Childhood, and I hope you enjoy. Lucas was out for the night. He had told me earlier about a potential rendezvous with a female friend of his and that he may not come back until the next morning. His passing of this information to me was strangely sweet, like he needed my approval to go out. We had never dated. It was a complicated arrangement, a troubling one. I passed his empty room and went to my own. My current decor resembled that of a fairy brothel, a canopy of string lights draped around the walls offset by pastel posters. It suited me well despite myself not being a fairy prostitute. I guess I would have to work on that in time. I took off my coat and sat in front of the computer, an involuntary motion by now, to check my email. Sender, Office of Sustainability, message, come vote for our new environmental policies. eBay, shipped, Q candy corset, bone and lining, pixelated. Your account has been verified. Lucas C. Yo, check out this weird shit I found, CGI porn from the 90s. None of these messages were necessarily bad to receive, although I didn't really care about what the Office of Sustainability was up to. I was far busier trying to sustain my own environment of apparent seediness and cheap corsets. I'm glad Lucas felt comfortable enough with me to share the gems of his masturbation explorations. It was truly a gift and experience. I glanced over again and stared at the message from Pixelated. I didn't think they would have verified me so quickly. I sent that, 2 days ago? They have a pretty efficient tech support team, I guess. I clicked on the email and was taken to the main website. Green text popped up saying, congratulations, continue to the next step to finalize your account. The next step? I followed the instructions on the screen. Choose a username, maximum of 16 characters. Be fun, sexy, and original. Oh God, how the fuck was I supposed to think of something clever and witty within the next 5 minutes? This fake username is going to follow my anonymous porn career for the rest of my life. Better make it good and memorable. Sally? No, too silly. Jessica? Too easy. Diamond? I'm not a stripper. Valerie? It only made me think of that Amy Winehouse song. I can't have that emotional responsibility during this line of work. Then I thought of another one. Why? Yes, of course. That makes complete sense. Christy. It all began with an anthropomorphic yellow griffin named Chris25436. I had adopted her from an online pet simulation game where you took care of imaginary animals inside a virtual world. It was called Neopets. Sometimes I think about my development and realize I'm just moving from one virtual world to another, growing older and wiser and seeking out more sophisticated environments. Chris25436's name was quickly shortened to Christy, the weird spelling just mostly an error on my part. I was 10. In my mind, Chrissy was 17, a high school junior, and stood for everything my own life had failed to represent at that moment. She was cool, alternative, had a hip boyfriend named Razar, a blue wolf. I did not stop to think about the particular challenges the relationship could have prompted, and constantly wore dark clothes and black eyeliner. A gothic beauty muse I could not even begin to compare myself to, for I was only a fat, disheveled child who read too much and spent far too much time on the computer. Her history goes on for longer than her teenage years. Christy eventually grows older with her childhood sweetheart, opens up a mall store named Poth, punk plus goth. For being smart, my creativity could have been a bit more refined, and had 3 children. Kind of a sellout lifestyle, but it served her well and it made me feel comfortable. Fast forward to a decade later and I revisit her. Her essence comes back to me while I stare at a registration screen. What username do I pick? Why don't we just do Christy Owens. Okay, username complete. Time to finish up the rest of this shit. Gender, female, obviously. I wondered how many dudes actually made money on here instead of just throwing theirs away. Age? I had to think about this for a moment. I was 20 and knew that this would be a totally great age to say that I was, because it was true, but should I be more adventurous? I could be 18 and no one would be able to tell the difference. It would probably be harder for people to think I was barely legal. A sour feeling rested in my stomach, churning at the thought that it was already appropriate to lie about how young I was. Whatever, 18 it is. Maybe I could say it was prom this spring, get a cute new dress for some sucker. Okay, Chrissy, let's not get ahead of ourselves. It was strange thinking of myself as new. Registration is complete. Welcome to Pixelated, Christy Owens. The website's logo was a deep purple color, strong bold text. The rest of the page was white, save for the hordes of small squares that followed each other in a list. Each square showed a small picture of a girl, sometimes a couple, or occasionally a penis without any fucking context at all. Every square was a link to a new reality, favoring sexuality and depravity, raining down e-currency to those who set themselves the challenge of becoming the next big thing. Pixelated was my California gold rush, and all I needed was a cheap Corsa from eBay and a webcam. Dare I try this right now? It's not like I had anything to do tonight. Lucas was off getting drunk and plowing some girl. I talked to him briefly about webcam modeling a few days ago, but his reaction was confusing and he seemed slightly hurt. You mean, he began, dudes will pay you money just for masturbating? Pretty much. I'm so jealous of your vagina right now. Should I really ask why? You have all the damn fucking power, don't you? All you have to do is show it to a group of guys and suddenly they're emptying their wallets to see more of it. No way in a million years would my dick ever get that kind of attention. If I could whip it out every time I was horny and was paid for showing it, I'd do it all day. But no one wants to see that. I think you're being sexist. I rolled my eyes. Oh my God, you're just mad your precious dick isn't a sought-after commodity. I'm sorry you resent the fact that I'm a budding entrepreneur who just happens to take advantage of lonely dudes and the prospects of cashing out. But I'm not sexist. Am I exploiting my youth and sexuality? Sure, but at least I can do it without touching anyone or risking myself for disease. It's the ultimate isolation. Be happy for me, maybe? I hope you realize that I'll be able to buy you booze now because of this. On mention of alcohol, Lucas's expression completely changed. Well, okay. Make your first purchase a handle of whiskey and I'll support your whoring unconditionally. He patted my ass like a 1950s sales executive would his secretary and left. Fuck it. I got up and walked over to my dresser to apply some makeup. Not too much, but just enough to make my eyes pop and my lips sparkle. Connecting to chat. Connected. Welcome to Pixelated, Christy Owens. I was nervous to start out. What if no one wanted to pay me? What if my role as a sexual deviant had no true market value? I sat there in front of the computer, makeup done, hair brushed lazily, just wearing my normal clothes from earlier that day. I noticed someone had come in. The name was Super Rumpus 58, highlighted blue. I wasn't sure what that meant exactly, but I went to private message him for the hell of it. A new tab appeared and I was in a private chat. Hi, Super Rumpus 58. Hi there. How are you? Good. Are you new? Yeah, it's my first day. You're beautiful. Need a mod? I don't know what that is. I've been on Pixelated a long time. I can help you get more tokens and remind users to be respectful. I can also kick them out if they break any rules. I didn't know there were rules here. There are rules everywhere. So now I had a free pimp to help settle down on Ruly John's. Great. While this exchange was happening, 15 new people had joined my room, only 2 of whom were colored names. The Greys began offering a smorgasbord of compliments to me, such as, hi, you're so cute, nice tits, anal, and my absolute favorite, hi, love, 34M from Turkey. Do you like private yachts? Unfortunately, the Turkish guy never said anything after that, which is a shame because I do in fact like private yachts. I got another private message from Super Rumpus 58. Set up a goal. How do I do that? Go to the tab under where your cam is and click on Applications, then select a goal, like a repeating one. Set it for an amount. I'd recommend 40 tokens. Tokens? Tokens. Oh, okay. I had no idea what he wanted me to do. Strip? Give eye contact for once? Read from my new copy of Great Expectations? I opted for stripping. 30 tokens for a piece of clothing seemed fair. The applications page consisted of tip goals, which is when you tantalize your guests with a proposition, and then they give you tokens until the goal is reached. There are other things you can set up too, like having multiple goals happening at once, playing some strange Keno game I still don't understand, and basically anything anyone can imagine since all the applications are set up as open source software. Pornography wins the tech game yet again, woohoo! Good girl, said Super Rumpus 58. I didn't respond back. My nervousness was transitioning into amusement. Super Rumpus 58 seemed to think that since I elected his mighty presence as a moderator, he was immune to the rules of respect he enforced towards everyone else. I ignored him for the rest of the show, letting him monitor the perimeters of my queendom for his own self-interests. Even though I was new, my impatience led me to misunderstand the 40-minute waiting game Pixelated often enforced on its performers. No matter how many followers I had at any given moment, it always took about 40 minutes for a peak audience to show up. That is when the money comes in, along with the first moment when all your clothes come off. I wasn't making any money on my first day, and I grew bored. I promised myself I'd try again when I had more patience. A quick goodbye to my mostly empty room. Goodbye, Super Rumpus 58, hopefully forever. And I disconnected, leaving Pixelated. Disconnected. Goodbye, Christy Owens. A quick look to my clock, and it appeared that an hour had already passed. How the fuck did that happen? Thank you.
Honestly. We'd been dating for almost a year at this time, and everyone knew it. I loved him, and everyone knew that too. You know his dad's the elder at the church, don't you? I nodded. My Nana wanted to make sure I wouldn't embarrass her, and quite frankly, I didn't care. Okay, and make sure you don't be telling him nothing about your life, neither, she added, tapping me on the hand to make sure I was listening. If anyone asks about your dad, you say he's away on business. Nobody needs to know where he really is. Nana, I'm not ashamed of my life. Raymond knows about Dad. He's my friend, I told you. So you just went and told the whole church our business, huh? She responded dramatically. One person was hardly the entire church, Nana. My entire life was full of secrets. Since I was a little girl, everyone in my family had told me to always tell the truth while simultaneously asking me to lie. My father, the criminal, who told me to always be authentic and straightforward, otherwise people wouldn't like me, also every day asked me to lie to my mother about what I'd see or hear him do. My mother, the cop, who always reminded me that my moral duty as a citizen was to be honest and upstanding, also every day reminded me not to tell my New York City school that I was a New Jersey resident. And lastly, my Nana, who was a minister at my church, taught me that lying was sinful, while instantaneously asking me to lie about my father's whereabouts in church every Sunday. It seemed like everyone was so comfortable asking me to lie about things that they themselves weren't comfortable about. All my life, I'd been the chamber of secrets and the keeper of dirty laundry. Fed up with the lies, I held onto my pendant and took a deep breath and decided that it was time. Nana, Raymond is my boyfriend, I confessed, overwhelmed by the lies that seemed to be consuming my life. What? Tamara Howard? How many times have I told you not to lie to me? We've been together a while, and honestly, we have no secrets, I continued confidently. I told you about dating in the church. No matter how innocent it might be, church folk will always make it into something that it's not. Nana, Ray and I don't care about that stuff. You should, Tam Tam, you should, she said, shaking her head. I felt bad for lying to my Nana for so long, but it was necessary. Her judgment and criticism wouldn't have done anything to prolong our relationship, and I refused to have outside interferences mess up what Raymond and I were working toward. I bit my lip guiltily and twirled the pendant that hung from my necklace. Hopefully my Nana wouldn't be too mad about the fact that I lied. So Nana, what you watching? I asked. She flipped through the channels on the television. Instead of answering me, she raised her hand and silently motioned me to be quiet. I then picked up the phone and began to text Ray. He was happy that I could cross one more lie off my list, and I was relieved that someone was on my side. Smiling at my phone as if it were Ray himself, I was beginning to feel better about my decision to tell my grandmother the truth. Who are you texting? My Nana probed, looking away from the television and directly at me. I looked up at her in a way that gave my answer away, and she shook her head some more. Should I leave, Nana? You don't seem to want me here, and I don't want to overstay my welcome. My mother had always told me never to stay where I wasn't welcome and to never beg for anyone's acceptance. So before she could answer, I stood up and searched for my bag, preparing to leave. Tam, where are you going to go? Back to Jersey? Yes, Nana, the trains run all night. I'm not going to send my granddaughter all the way to Jersey. It's getting dark. I nodded and realized that it was getting a bit too dark to go home. I'm going to the living room for a bit, I told her, needing some space. Leaving my Nana's room, I maneuvered my way through all the junk in her hallway. My Nana was a pack rat and held on to just about every memory. Photo albums, baby blankets, church dresses that I could no longer fit into that she swore someone else could use one day. My Nana was what one might call a hoarder. I hopscotched over her things and took notice of all the art on the wall. My Nana had a lot of black art, paintings by famous African-American artists, and photographs of influential black leaders. I remember as a kid, the black and white photo of Malcolm X used to scare me. This was the picture of him in the suit. He wore the glasses and had his pointer finger on his temple. I remember always thinking that he was watching me whenever I did something wrong. Now as I walked through the hallway, I could see the beauty and the strength in that once so scary photo. Tamara, I thought you said you were going to the living room. I see you in the hallway. I'm going, Nana. I was just looking at the pictures, I replied, rolling my eyes. Sitting in the living room, I crossed my legs on her couch and began to unwind. I had such a long day, and I wished that I could just call Savannah. She'd know exactly what to say to make me feel better. Deciding to pull myself together, I searched for the remote in hopes of watching a bit of television before I fell asleep. But of course, in my Nana's cluttered house, finding anything was impossible. I scavenged through laundry, papers, toys, and magazines until finally I gave up. Reaching for one of the books on the coffee table, I noticed a blank black and white composition notebook. I picked it up and deemed it mine. As I picked up a conveniently misplaced black marker on the floor and wrote my name on it. I opened the new notebook, hearing it cackle as I bent the binding for the first time. I remember writing in capital letters, "List of lies," and then proceeding to expel every lie I'd ever told from my brain. Half of the list was comprised of lies I was asked to tell, and the other half, well, those were my own little white lies. This list at first started out very structured. It was numbered and chronological, but soon it turned into a prose of some sort. From the day my father introduced me to drugs to the time I lied to Raymond about not seeing a movie that I'd actually seen without him. I began telling the stories of these lies and their origins and the way one lie turned into another. Remembering the day I fell asleep in class and my teacher scolding me about paying attention, not knowing the commute I endured daily. And the time my pastor asked me how my father was doing, and I felt forced to lie and say he was fine, knowing full well in jail he probably wasn't. Writing them down was frightening at first, but then somehow it became beautiful. That stupid little lie I told my mom about my father taking me to the park when he was really taking me around the city to conduct his business turned into a comical story, twisted and fabricated for humorous effect. I was pregnant with the dishonesties of my childhood, and giving birth to these deceptions gave me a sense of release and pleasure. For some strange reason, writing them on paper literally removed them from my mental state, and I enjoyed the power that that black marker gave me. I had the authority to essentially change the happenings of my past and turn fucked up stories about a little girl who grew up too soon into crazy tales about a girl who simply encounters a succession of quirky events. I wondered if this was how it felt to be a writer, to eject your pain and hardship onto a page until it no longer hurt or felt like a hardship. Thank you.
So I wrote a novel about a boy who lives with his father and his uncle and in his grandmother's house. And his grandmother is named Josephine, and she is not a very nice woman. So this is the second chapter. Peter heard the light voices of the village girls, laughing and shouting to each other in the pale morning, and paused at the window on his way to the kitchen with the water. He could see only the path coming around the kitchen side and leading up to the cliffs, so he could never see the girls approaching, only after they had passed the house and were carrying on to the goat paths. For this reason, he stood right at the window watching, not fearing they would see him. There were 3 today, though sometimes there were 4, and sometimes 5, all wearing their hair back in tight braids, though the artistry of the knots varied, and all with thick stockings and wool skirts poking out from the ends of their heavy leather work coats. Josephine had a few of these coats in storage, his mother's coats, from when she'd been younger and growing. These coats were all the same in style and had never changed. Even Josephine had a well-worn version from when she used to go out on the ships, with a high collar that clasped at her chin and 6 buttons from collarbone to hip. The waist was always snug and well-tailored, and the skirt hung in 4 heavy pleats. The lining and collar, of his mother's coats at least, were black suede, and the buttons carved from maple and stained black to match. The sound of fabric moving brought his shoulders up to his ears. "Peter." Josephine's voice came from her bedroom door, where she'd just pulled back the curtain. Her hair was in a wild pile on her head from sleeping on it. "Go on, away from the window." Peter went on to the kitchen, thinking about the girls. It was on their way back in the evening that if they caught sight of him in the window, they would shout and come near the house until Josephine sent them away, which was why he always assumed he wasn't allowed at the window at all. They had come many times, whether he was at the window or not. They would come with their long braids unfurling, and the heavy sleeves of their jackets folded up to their elbows, and they would lean in through the window or come by the back door and call his name in sing-song tones until he or Josephine came. And if she was busy or had guests, he would come as soon as he heard them and urge them to be quiet and plead with them to leave. When there was only the 3 of them, they always came, Lily, Elizabeth, and Tracy, with wide smiles and sweat shining on their faces. Lily would lean against the house beside the steps, but never come up, only look at him with heavy dark eyes when he came to the door, like they were sharing a secret. Tracy always sat down on the steps and twisted to see him, as if she hadn't even noticed it was his house or realized he'd be there. Always she twisted to look back at him, as though he really should be standing before her, as if they should really be at her house, and he the one coming to visit like a surprise. And Elizabeth would come right into the doorway and ask for cookies or fruit, always with her hand on his shoulder, or leaning in to see if Josephine was coming, before tugging gently on his hair. In the evening, even if he wasn't in the window, he could usually tell who was there, and hear their voices getting closer, but quieter as they whispered and giggled together. This time Josephine had guests, and he could hear her debating questions of trade with Miss Kelly, and could picture Miss Case nodding along as she always did whenever Josephine had something to say. These 2 always put Josephine in a splendid mood, but encouraged her to be verbose, and Peter didn't want her to have the opportunity to turn her attention to Lily and the girls, so when he heard them kick over the milk bucket, and then calling his name quite softly, he was already opening the door to the chill afternoon. It was light out, of course, before dinner, which was why the girls were coming back, but the sun was beginning its descent, and Marcus was chopping vegetables and very determinedly ignoring the sounds behind him. Lily, same as always, was loosening the patterns of her braids until her hair fell in sharp waves over her shoulders. Tracy had bought a new white scarf, it seemed, and was tying it around her neck and looking back at him, stroking the material. Elizabeth had kicked the milk bucket and was retrieving it from the brush at the side of the steps, and all, with wide smiles, looked at him expectantly. "Please go." He extended his hand, not knowing what he was reaching for, and let it fall back at his side. Elizabeth jumped up the steps, her neck craning to see past him, looking in at Marcus and the mess of dinner in progress. She spotted the oranges and pointed. "Would you peel us some oranges, Peter?" She took his shoulder in hand and pulled him a bit through the doorway to press her lips to his cheek. He snapped away, backing into the kitchen, and the girls laughed until Marcus turned and hushed them. He did not step away from his vegetables, though, and turned back around, ignoring them again. Peter pulled the back of his hand across his cheek and looked into smirking faces. Lily had come up onto the steps, and Tracy had almost completely turned and tugged at the hem of Elizabeth's skirt. "Look at him blush." Elizabeth came into the doorway, took a step into the kitchen. "Come on, Peter." Her voice was tight with laughter. "Please just go." The kitchen was too small, and there was nowhere to go to distance himself from her. Elizabeth tried to straighten her face and offered him a frown full of mocking pity. "Tell you what, Pete." She picked up one of the round fruits and pushed it into his hands. "Peel us some oranges." She looked over her shoulders at the others and added, "And we'll go." Peter looked to his father's stiffened shoulders and then took a knife to the first orange. He skinned them easily, a mist rising from the blade, and within minutes each girl was tearing into the fruit and sucking on the wedges. They loitered on the steps, reluctant to leave after getting such a reaction out of him. Tracy was the one to press the girls on, turning, as she always turned to him, as though remembering. "We're going back into town later." Lily and Elizabeth nudged her, looking at Peter with mirth and challenge. "You should come." She offered it with half sincerity, half indifference, as though she really couldn't be bothered about it. And then they were gone, laughter and taunting fading as they distanced themselves from the house. Peter could feel the heat in his face, turning back to his work preparing dinner, with Marcus glancing at him from time to time, both of them, Peter knew, trying to pretend nothing had happened, and gradually the tension faded. Peter liked working in the kitchen with his father. They were never bumping into each other, like Jacob always was, bumbling in from time to time and dumping lumber or water or bags of berries in the most inconvenient places, and stepping wherever you happened to be trying to go. Somehow, whenever Peter needed a spoon or a particular bowl, Marcus would be handing it over, having just finished with it. And then while Marcus would be mixing ingredients or turning the fish on the stove, Peter would have gotten along to washing the dishes, and it was all such a cohesive efficiency that Peter was always highly satisfied with the job they'd done and his contribution. That evening, Marcus was sautéing squash and collard greens with rosemary sausage, and Peter was peeling oranges, paring away the membrane of their crescent wedges with his sharpest knife, and floating them in sugar water with soaked pear spears and painstakingly skinned blueberries. After a while, since Peter was working at the round table in the middle of the kitchen, he could see Josephine in her usual state of restlessness through the door into the sitting room. Her guests had left to eat dinner in their own homes, and though Peter concentrated on his work and tried not to look up at her, she often shocked him by passing close by the doorway to get a glimpse of what they were doing. She went to sit by the crackling fire, opened a book listlessly on her knee, and abandoned it to pass by the kitchen door once more on her way to the window, where she planted her hands on the sill and leaned out into the wind and the deepening sky, and heaved a great sigh. Then she crossed back around, skirting the table where they would eat, and peeked into the kitchen yet again to see if they'd made any progress, though it was her own highly enforced rule that dinner be served no later and no earlier than sunset. It was getting colder now, but Marcus and Peter had grown accustomed to her sudden temper in summer, when dinner time seemed to get later and later, and the sun seemed to dawdle longer and longer over the cliffs, shooting out bands of orange and yellow and purple. And all evening Josephine would pace, picking up her book and tossing it down again, sighing out the window, sending curious looks in through the kitchen door. Sometimes when the weather was nice, she would walk out to the cliff's edge with an old wooden cane and peer down at the port churning with people, and the bay with its slow ships coming and going, and then she'd look in at them if they left the back door open to the breeze. She would sit down when the sky began to color on the side of the table facing the window, so that when the sun finally slipped below the cliffs, she could look expectantly toward the kitchen, where the men would be appearing with arms laden. Peter came first to lay Josephine's plate down, her tall glass and silverware, real silver, Caroline had announced when she'd brought them back from one of her ships, and then the other 3 table settings. He would sit then across from Josephine's sharp gaze, with his back to the window. Jacob would follow with a long plate of sliced bread and the dish of fruit paste, or when they had it, butter, and they took the seat on Josephine's left, facing the kitchen but cut off from it. This had not always been the case. In the past, it had been Peter who sat on Josephine's left, and Marcus who faced her, and Jacob on her right, as close to the kitchen and escape as he could get. But Josephine had caught Peter so many times with his fork halfway to his mouth, staring at the sliver of a view he could glimpse through the window, some passing cloud, or the girls that would run past on the way to the goat paths down the side of the cliffs into town. He would stare all the more once they disappeared over the edge. Josephine disliked this and had finally switched him with his father to face away from it, and now she could see the view just looking past his shoulder, and he couldn't see it at all. When Jacob had smirked at him and his punishment, she had moved Jacob too, and now they all sulked about it. Then Marcus would come with the main dish. It was this time of day, this moment, his father approaching with a platter, sometimes two, like today, the sausage and vegetables in one arm, the softened fruit sloshing in the other, bending to center them on the table, and delivering Josephine's servings to her plate. It was in this moment that he always remembered that his father was very handsome. Marcus was tall and still rather slim, his arms hefting easily the heavy platters, strengthened from beating the washing, hefting the loads of dishware from the tub, and carrying the water every day for Josephine, and his fair hair and eyes today, a fine green in the dim evening light. It was always in that moment that Josephine stopped looking so carefully for something to complain about, and they would all realize or remember, in the face of everything she might say or do to any one of them, she was still, at the very least, fond of Marcus. And Josephine would tuck in, and Marcus would bend to serve his brother and son, and sitting to serve himself. And the three men would lower their heads over their plates and eat as slowly, but as unobtrusively as possible. They waited, eating slowly, because if Josephine was not distracted, if Josephine finished quickly, she would look up from her empty plate and see them all eating quietly, and none of them Caroline, and she might leave them alone.
Hi. So my project is a nonfiction written arts and Asian studies project about my Tibetan grandmother and the food that she cooks. And so I'm going to read a few fragments about tsampa, which is the Tibetan staple made from roasted barley. Tsampa, paste. Tsampa, I conduct an experiment. I will make tsampa, eat it, and attempting to be as fidelious as possible to my sense perceptions, I will record my responses. I approach the tsampa with trepidation. My friend Kunsang has given me a little Ziploc bag full of it. I pull it down from the shelf, and I feel uncomfortable and a little afraid. The kitchen is a mess, with unwashed pots in the sink, and the table covered with last night's flotsam. I move a half-played board game off the table. I wash a bowl and a spoon. I begin by making a mound of the flour in a bowl. It's a pale shade of brown, and a closer examination reveals a speckled grain. Here and there are darker dots where the flour was ground imperfectly. I cut 2 slivers of butter onto my mound. I have made black tea with a little salt and sugar. I pour the tea into the bowl and tentatively begin to stir with my fingers. It is warm and the tactility is pleasurable, but I am too self-aware, so careful not to over-knead that I can't enjoy the sensation. I am afraid that if I take my time with it, it will be ruined. When I finally place the tsampa in my mouth, it tastes wrong. I must have done something wrong. It's coating every surface in my mouth in the familiar manner, but it tastes blue, not sweet enough. Without the sugar, there's no flavor. Tsampa eaters of the world. Tsampa, the most quintessentially Tibetan food. I like it, but I don't know if I could eat it every day. No doubt Agu Jamyang, my uncle, who eats it every day, enjoys it so much because it is the food of his youth. But his diet, like almost everything else he does, is also political. 2 years ago on his blog, he published a post about tsampa titled, after Orwell, In Defense of Tibetan Cooking. It is an unabashed homage to tsampa, and by extension to Tibetan culture. He quotes moments from Homer, which describe the eating of roasted barley. He praises its diversity of uses. It is an excellent trail food. It's extremely nutritious, and so on and on. He finds support everywhere, even quoting the colonial British adventurer Peter Fleming, who writes, "One of the great virtues of tsampa is that you can vary the flavor and the consistency at will. You can make it into a cake, or you can make it into a porridge, and either can be flavored with sugar, salt, pepper, vinegar, or on special occasions, for you only had one bottle, Worcestershire sauce. And as if that were not enough, you can make it with cocoa instead of tea. The consecration of tsampa as the defining food of the Tibetan people is more than just one of my uncle's pet projects. In 1957, Tarchin Babu, the editor and publisher of the Tibet Mirror, the only Tibetan newspaper at the time, put out an open letter calling tsampa eaters to unite. At least since then, tsampa has been hailed as one of the unifying symbols of the nation. Its effectiveness as a national symbol comes not only from its unique flavor, but also from its exclusivity. It's one of the few foods that Tibetans don't share with anyone else. Unlike stir-fries and noodles, breads and dumplings, tsampa is uniquely Tibetan, so much so that in idiomatic usage, one can say that a thing has the smell of tsampa to mean it is indubitably Tibetan. Tsampa, sweetness. When I visited my cousin Acha Sedner in Zurich last year, she offered me tsampa for breakfast. We had been talking earlier about my grandmother, as the cousins always do when we meet. The tsampa was hidden at the back of a cabinet in her well-ordered kitchen. It was good that I was visiting, she told me, because she never usually eats it. After pouring tea into tsampa and making the porridge, we had to keep adding sugar slowly, 1 teaspoon at a time, until finally, after absorbing what seemed like a sickening amount of sugar, it tasted familiar. 2 cousins who rarely meet, with little to talk about but our shared experience of being diasporic Tibetans, eating tsampa together. We didn't have a natural instinct for it, the ease of being that comes with practice. It felt like we were experimenting at being ourselves. Tsampa paste continued. It's the aftertaste that stays with me. Warmth spreads throughout my chest. Toasted but not crunchy, this is the taste in my mouth. It seeps behind my nose. Grounded, breadier than bread, a deep brown. When I breathe out, especially, I can feel the warm tsampa breeze filtering through my nasal cavity, the emptiness behind my face, brushing against my insides. It spreads to every part of me. It's nourishing, a flavor all around, not like the pointiness of a pickle which dances on tongue and tip of nose. It rises up from within, from my chest, as if I'm breathing in a tsampa mill. Indistinct, unbiteable. A major part of the experience, the unbiteability, the paste nature. There's something primordial about pastes, as in the Chinese creation myth about Pangu and Nuwa, where the original humans are formed from riverine mud. And yes, it's womb-like, the way it fills me up and coats my insides. Afterwards, some tsampa remains clumped around my cuticles. I raise my hand to my nose. It smells warm and buttery. Another wave washes over the body, the smell of butter mixed with tsampa. I feel against my conscious intentions, like I could put my nose to the skin of a Tibetan nomad, and this would be the smell. But stop. I'm willing myself with my whole body to feel differently, to have a response that transcends the all-too-easy associations, the womb, the nomad, the mountains behind my home in Dharamsala, the Potala Palace towering over the central Tibetan plain. I want it to be non-mundane, more than just good or bad tasting, but also more than just what I've been taught, what's unexpected. Eyes squeezed shut, my attempt at willed synesthesia fails. The only images that come to my mind are more of the ones I don't want. Too many expectations. I come conflicted to the tsampa. I'd like to empty myself of all my preconceptions and see what happens, but everything goes according to plan, against my wishes. Is it reasonable to expect an interesting, recordable response from myself in this faux experimental setup? I realize maybe this is just not how we proceed from flavor to meaning, from taste and texture to feeling, emotion, memory, social context, identity, politics. Maybe Proust can help, I think, and read the famous scene from Swan's Way in which the narrator, having taken a bite of a madeleine dipped in tea, finds himself overwhelmed by a sensation of all-powerful joy. He reflects, "Undoubtedly what is thus palpitating in the depths of my being must be the image, the visual memory which, being linked to that taste, has tried to follow it into my conscious mind. But its struggles are too far off, too much confused. Scarcely can I perceive the colorless reflection in which are blended the uncapturable whirling medley of radiant hues, and I cannot distinguish its form, cannot invite it, as the one possible interpreter, to translate to me the evidence of its contemporary, its inseparable paramour, the taste of cake soaked in tea. Cannot ask it to inform me what special circumstance is in question of what period in my past life. The first taste of the madeleine doesn't result in an immediate upsurge of memory. It manifests itself only as a diffuse, unbiteable sensation. It takes thinking and reflection to connect this sensation to the narrator's youth in Cambrai. Only then do the previously suppressed memories spill forth. But my Tsampa didn't withhold images and memories for a lack of thinking on my part. On the contrary, I realize I overthought it. The Madeleine took Proust's narrator by surprise. No amount of faithful scribing of phenomenological detail can change this fact. You can't force a surprise, can't find something where nothing is hidden. A little piece of Tsampa is stuck in the niche behind my upper incisor. I reach in and dislodge it with a finger. It strikes me then that the anxiety and expectation I bring to the Tsampa is similar to the anxiety and expectation I have about interviewing my grandmother. First, that unable to rein in all my thinking, I will impose too much of myself. Second, the underlying anxiety that I will slip up, reveal there's nothing there, betray the falsity of my Tibetanness. Thank you.
Hi. I wrote a fictional narrative based on the life of a Bavarian executioner from the 20th century, and this is from the part where he meets Sophie Scholl of the White Rose Resistance movement, and it's rather brief. The Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterspartei carefully guarded the details of most cases that came before me, so much so that I am responsible for having dropped the blade on anonymous bodies. During the busy years, it would have been nearly impossible to keep track of the sentences. There were days on which 30 men entered my chamber without leaving. Including cleanup, we managed one criminal every 10 minutes, and we regularly worked for more than 5 hours at a time. With Sophie Scholl, it was different. Her case was meant to set a precedent and thus received exceptional coverage. The young girl became a symbol of the state's blind commitment to severe punishment, regardless of how chaste the criminal or how minor the crime. I can attest that the NSDAP did not fall short of delivering the promised brutality demonstrated by Sophie's merciless conviction and death. Hers was one of the most disturbing executions of my career and one of the most difficult faces to forget. The morning after her execution, an article was posted in the Münchener Neuesten Nachrichten. In the Schwurgerichtssaal of the Palace of Justice on February 22, 1943, the People's Court sentenced 24-year-old Hans Scholl, 21-year-old Sophie Scholl, both from Munich, and 23-year-old Christoph Probst from Alt-Ans near Innsbruck, to death and to loss of civil rights for the high treason and for aiding and abetting the enemy. The sentence was executed the same day. Those sentenced conducted themselves inappropriately by defacing houses and by disseminating treasonous leaflets to the military. They affronted the spirit of resistance among the German nation in a most shameless manner. In light of the heroic battle of the German nation, such subjects have earned nothing save for a quick and dishonorable death. I've never seen anybody die in so dignified a way as Sophie Scholl. With the composure of a nun reciting the Our Father, she asked the judge at her trial whether she should expect a beheading or a public hanging. Though she was the youngest person to come before me, she was also the most prepared to die. There was no question that she would. Within 4 days of their arrest, she, her brother Hans, and their friend Christoph Probst, all members of the White Rose Resistance Group, received their sentences. Hitler had been in Munich during the trial for unrelated reasons and gave unmistakable orders. Their deaths were to be an example of just how seriously the state was taking treason. The 2-hour trial was merely a facade for what had been a capital punishment case from the very beginning. The Scholl siblings were allowed a brief reunion with their parents between the hours of 4 and 5 p.m. on the afternoon of their execution. Sophie entered the visiting room in a spotless white dress and thanked her parents with a laugh for the sweets that they had brought her. They had been her last request. The family did not know that during that same hour I received the order that I was to report to Stadelheim for an immediate execution. In follow-up interviews conducted in the years after Sophie's death, numerous authorities involved in the Scholl case cited their amazement at the young woman's self-assured demeanor. The prison guards were so taken with the 3 convicted students that they even allowed them a shared cigarette just moments before I performed the sentences. Sophie entered first. She carried herself with a majesty that could not be feigned and was neither obstinate nor afraid. She had, after all, been given the option to live. The Gestapo investigator Robert Moore had offered her an off-the-record testimony in which she could denounce her brother's activities and thus evade the death penalty. But Sophie was uninterested in saving herself at the expense of denying her beliefs. They had been what led her to risk her life in the first place. There were murmurs about Sophie's death during the war, which became veritable roars after the fall of the Reich. I read the papers with devotion and learned what I could about her life, which had been widely broadcast by the start of the 1950s. I heard her last hours recounted in so many variations that the amalgamation of these parts became a tangible truth in my eyes, because I had seen her in the flesh during her final minutes, and I was able to imagine her poised in the courtroom, in front of her parents and with her cellmate Elsa Goebbels, as though I had been there for all of it. I'm convinced that certain souls linger, taking up residence in the minds of those who knew them and presenting themselves at periodic intervals. Sophie's was one of these. Hers was not merely a face that I saw in the papers, on posters, or in books. There was a cut to her jawline that gave her a look of determination, a striking quality not adequately depicted in drawings. In fact, I hardly recognized the images in the media as the girl I had seen standing before me. What I noticed was that every so often I would find a person with the same defiant jaw. The people that bore her countenance were both male and female, some already graying and others still in the flush of youth, occasionally cheerful, but more often pensive. Thankfully, I encountered none such likenesses in my chamber, as I could not have held myself responsible for extinguishing another flame like hers. It is now 1964, 21 years after the death of 21-year-old Sophie, and the West German Federal Post has put her on a stamp. Though I can't think of a single person to whom I might need to address a letter, I've purchased a sheet and I keep it in my binder, along with a corresponding article that mentions me as the presiding executioner in her case. If my name ever gains any lasting recognition in the coming years, it will be because of her. Thank you.
Thanks to everyone who stuck around. I'm a little bit sick, so this might be quiet or something. You see a bruise or hickey or whatever peer out at you from the collar of your shirt, and you think of all the years it took you to recover from a man who never left visible marks on you. Bruises are just internal bleeding, but that was the kind of filling up with blood no one would see until years later. It would seep into the wells under your eyes and pool at the front of your brain, dragging your head down, putting pressure on your sinuses in a way that made your eyes Putting pressure on your sinuses in a way that made your eyes leak even when you didn't exactly expect them to. He dated a girl after you who was 18. It's like he bends one, seeing how much it'll take to break her, and when she unexpectedly snaps back into place, flinging him off like mashed potatoes from a spoon, he starts over again with a new one. But this time he was smart to start at 18. This time no court could question him in the same way. Before he came to visit, Dad told me to get a photocopy of his ID, his mother's phone number, his address in California, saying, if any monkey business goes down, we'll know how to get a hold of him. Eddie told me that he made Corinna have an abortion once. I almost threw up. When Eddie came to visit, he was constantly angry. He said it was because he was hungry. He didn't like my dad's cooking, and my dad didn't like that he didn't like my dad's cooking, and he kept making it and expecting us to eat out of spite. On the 5th day, Dad got out 2 shot glasses, one for himself and one for Eddie, and began pouring vodka for them both. I had to speak between them, to one in Russian and to the other in English. Papa, пожалуйста, не напивайся. Dad, please don't get drunk. Я не буду напиваться, но он будет. I won't get drunk, but he will. Eddie, he's trying to get you drunk. He said, I know. Я хочу знать, что он хочет с тобой. I want to know what his intentions with you are. I translate, he wants to know what you want with me. He says, I know. I hate this so much. Dad says, я хочу поговорить с ним. Sorry, I can't even read in Russian. There's a translation though. I want to talk with him about you, and this is the only way he'll be honest. I hate this so much. Why are you doing this? Can't you see this is harming me? There's sweat and hummingbird heartbeat even before the tears. They get drunk together, Eddie intently swallowing down with a psychological fortitude even his hesitant physiology can't override, Dad taking fewer drinks, and Eddie pretending he doesn't notice how many fewer. In Russian, Dad says, I know enough English for this. I want you to go into the other room. An hour later, Dad calls me in. Their eyes are red, both of them. They're so drunk they stink, both of them. Dad pulls me close, his fingers pressed hard into my arm and the fat deposit above my behind. He tells me he can tell Eddie really loves me. I can travel home to California with him. I can do whatever I want. I translate. Eddie breathes a sigh of relief. I told you it'd be fine, he sniffs. He lurches just a little bit. Eddie rises, his whole 6 feet 5 inches, 265 pounds from the kitchen table, shambles to the bathroom and vomits in it, and then into the toilet, me in the doorway, his body trembling. Dad shouts from the kitchen, but I can't hear him over splashing water, over grinding and convulsing stomach. I can't hear him over the way Eddie's brown hands look yellow with the pressure of holding himself steady, gripping the white porcelain of the toilet bowl. Dad appears in the hallway behind me. You want to date a man like this? You made him like this. He did this for you. I look on, and then, frantic and confused, run to the living room, pull out the couch, throw down the sheets, unroll and unzip a sleeping bag for a blanket. Eddie is empty, and he stands again and apologizes, eyes wet. He tries to use a towel that doesn't belong to him to clean up the floor, and I start to pull him to the living room instead, frantic and confused. I help him take off his jeans, thinking only that he needs sleep. Dad just watches, upper lip curled, swaying on his feet. Look at him. He got drunk to satisfy you. He knew what you wanted from him. He's fat and dark, and before he can continue, something in my little 17-year-old body snaps, I hate you. My voice cracks somewhere deep behind my belly button. He's quiet. Then, you're acting like your mother. The stench of alcohol seethes out from his mouth, wobbling on the end of the stick that is his neck, his eyes dark. The familiar and putrid smell of his depression and anger and fear grip me from behind his grit teeth. I feel something well up inside of me with its jaws snapped together, head low. Some sort of animal in my chest, and it's clawing at my inside walls to get to my tongue, spring out at him from the tip of it, but those walls buckle like clay. I want to scream, I hate you, but I never learned the word in Russian, and in English it just isn't the same. He just wouldn't get it. Eddie curls up on the sofa bed. I use paper towels to clean vomit off the floor. My father's standing in the doorway and watching me, his eyes hot on the back of my neck. Is this what you want out of life? I drown his shirt in the sink, wash my hands, smell them, wash them again, stony-faced. My father is standing in the doorway and watching me, his eyes hot on the back of my neck. When I try to pass him, he grasps my upper arm. Always digging in, always hurting. Living with your mother has ruined you. I'm losing all respect for you. She disgusts me, you're just like her. He lets go, turns toward bed like a clumsy automaton, struggling to stay upright. I feel so much heavier than before. An object in motion stays in motion, and I am an object stopped short. I check on Eddie, terrified he'll vomit in his sleep, choke on it. We'll have a big cold body in the morning, and the man I love will be a mound of flesh on a sofa bed. I go to my grandmother's room, tuck my body legs first into a sleeping bag on the floor, and curl up in it best I can. I cry with my hands over my mouth, body lurching, confused. Presumably, I sleep. Sometime later, my grandmother's rice paper fingers carefully pet my cheek and hair from where she lies on the futon. I open my eyes to the dark room, the sound of the radiator clicking, the bright moon high in the window, the sounds of New York City somewhere far away. Even today, something is worth feeling joy.